Good morning. Welcome to the April 25th Stockbridge Board of Assessors meeting. Mike?
Okay. Last meeting minutes, you weren't here, Gary. I carried over basically everything that we talked about, including the going into executive session at the end. So you have to sign, we got the contract from RRC right here for the personal property discovery. That has to go out. We've already had one of their employees pick up all of our form of lists. So they've already, you might see, his name's Charlie, you might see him, big tall guy out and about. He's gonna be working on that in the next few months. It's basically the same thing that they showed me in the email, same price. We're down for 100 accounts, but if they find more, it'll be so much more after that, but we'll have money for it.
So I sign on top and then. So,
Oh my goodness.
$25 today? Yes.
Yep. Okay, number 3, we mentioned at the last meeting that we indeed have to do the second homeowner form of list study. Joe Barberi verified it. I thought we had another year. I thought it was every 6 years, and I still think it is, but they want us to do it this year to coincide with the certification. So Tammy and I are working on that to have it dated for May 1st and due June, what did we say? 17th. And that's always a fun study to send out. We're gonna stress in the letter that we can't accept same as last year, because these have not gone out since 5 years ago. And we really need, we'll in the letter, I'm gonna word it very clearly what we're looking for. And, you know, we understand how daunting this request is. And it obviously might be frowned upon when you get it in the mail, but we have to do this. It's a requirement as part of our certification for fiscal 23. And Tammy and I will both be there to filter questions. They're going to be able to email us questions and call us. And even if Tammy's in Terry's office, she'll be working on it.
Is there a way you could give them an example? So that.
Yeah, I do. In the letter,
Okay.
There's a little paragraph, like this is what we're looking for. And, you know, at this point, if it's easier to just give a total too, because, we're only going to be adding up everything. Tammy goes through at the very end, totals up everything, and that's what we use.
And if
That would even work, because I know this can be a huge task.
And if
I wouldn't
nobody
want to do
sends
it,
theirs in,
honestly.
what are we gonna do? Are we gonna fill in like the average of what everybody's is?
No, once we get whatever, when we're not actually gonna have time to send out another batch. So, we're gonna be relying on the second homeowners. I think last time I think we sent around 650 last time, and we got close to, I think, 400 back, which is good. Those will be arrayed in a study, and there's an equation that the DOR makes us do where it's basically a sales analysis study. You're looking for the median amount. So if people send them back with 0, that's not going to help, because that still gets added to the study, counted as one, even though it makes no sense to me, but that's what the state makes us do. So the least amount you get and the least amount listed, the lower your percentage is going to be against the building value, because that's how we come up with the value. So again, I mean, for me, it would, if it's easier to list a total, is better than sending it back saying,
Right.
And you could, the board can impose a fine for ones that aren't returned. That's a whole nother, you have to do it on the tax bills when they go out. That's pointless, because we need those for July when the state will be up there looking at it.
What I was asking is like, say, if I don't send mine in, then what do you put on my bill?
It's gonna be well, it'll be whatever percentage we come
Okay,
up with.
that's right, yeah.
So you're still gonna we get that question a lot too. Will I get a bill if I don't return it? You're still gonna get a tax bill.
Yeah.
You're still
So
gonna,
it'll be
you'll get a
based on the
personal
average.
property. Exactly.
Okay, well, that's.
Yep.
And it's also, people are listing down, not necessarily the cost new of all of the items, it's the current value of the items.
Right.
So if you have let's say a couch.
Yeah, we'd rather them do that instead of giving us the original amount because then we have to figure it out.
Right, so.
You know, we don't wanna do that.
$1,000 and it's currently worth $200, they can put something like furniture for the entire structure of
Yes.
$10,000.
Yep,
And if they.
exactly.
So they don't need to put couch, chair and
No.
individual values.
No, Tammy and I stress that when they call, and there will be lots of calls. I mean, we expect it. Because again, it's not something we send out or are required to, that's a huge expense if you have to send it out every year.
Well, that's why I was wondering if it wasn't worthwhile filling out a example. So that they would have,
Well, the thing is, the issue we're encountering is because we just sent out the second half tax bills and you're limited to how many, it's a 4-page form plus a cover letter. So in order to be able to send it out the way we send them out without additional postage, we have to weigh the actual, each parcel and make sure that it conforms because the tax bill this time around, we had the notification in it for the Airbnbs, and we also had a notification in there if you didn't pay your personal property bill, and we also had some people had 3 or 4 bills stuffed into one.
What if
So it's like
we put it on the
we'll have to limit it. We could do it back to back.
well, that or just put an example on the website.
Yep, we could do that too. Absolutely. I mean, I will say for
Anything
the
to make it
for the
easier
most
for 'em.
part, it's amazing how much gets filled in.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, because it is I will agree with them. Personally, it is a daunting thing to get in the mail. Business, the same form that businesses get that we need them to itemize everything as well. I just know on a personal level, if I had to itemize everything I have in my house, I know that would take a while to do. So even if they need an extension past the 17th, we won't be looking at these probably until, mid-July, I would think. The DOR is not here until August. So I think it's plenty of time. Plus what will happen is a lot of people aren't back yet. They're not up here to actually see what is in their second home. So hopefully it's not too difficult, but we understand how, what we're asking for. But again, it's out of our hands because this is something that the Department of Revenue, as part of our certification, if we don't do this, we can't move forward, not just on the personal property, but getting our tax rate set. So it's just one of those boxes that needs to be checked off. And unfortunately, it's a big project that has to get done. And we're really asking, everyone to help out so we can get that study completed.
So again, they don't need to do itemized stuff. They can put it in groups like furniture, $10,000.
Yep, actually, the form actually does show like furniture and anything extra. And it's a small box, so we'll end up getting papers sent back with just listings, we'll total it up. But if not, yeah, you could just take each category and put the total of each one. That's not an issue with the Department of Revenue. And again, these are not open to the public, just the Board of Assessors and the staff see these forms. I don't think, and this is the 4th one I've been involved in, the Department of Revenue doesn't look at the forms themselves. They look at the study that's submitted and they want to make sure that we're following their calculation for coming up with the percentage. Right now, we're using 2% against the building value. So whatever comes in and we do that study, that could change. The highest I think it's ever been was 6% or no, 5%. And it typically is around 2 or 3%. It's easier if you have fewer second homes because you could really, send out another one, keep trying it, but we're under the gun for, a few months getting this done. So we're going to try to get them out by the end of the week, if not early next week. And we're going to basically give a month and a half to return them. And if you do need an extension, just call and we will grant it for at least a few more weeks.
So again, if we don't get enough of these studies done, enough of the reports coming back, we can't complete the study and the state will not verify or will not give us a tax rate.
Yeah, they could actually come back and say, do it again.
Right.
Which would push us into the fall, and we've got, this is gonna be a interesting year as it is because of the valuation. So I mean, we were trying to avoid anything that we know could give us a hang up. And, again, we understand what we're requesting is a lot, but it is something that has to be done. There are some communities that send these out every year and they do a study every year. I mean, we have so many, we're looking at sending out 709 of these. That's a lot.
And we don't necessarily go back into the houses and look at the furniture and look at the
Never.
clothing. So,
Oh, no, never.
yeah.
No, I know there were talks years ago about requiring us to do that, which had to have been a rumor because that would have been ridiculous. And who in their right mind would even allow that? I would not be the person that would be doing it.
That's 709 second homes.
Well, again, I just went through the list and all the deeds and I pulled out the ones that sold. I put in the new ones that I feel by going through the street listing that the town clerk gives us, that number could possibly also be used for the, if there's rumors of a residential exemption that could come into play. But right now, that there might be a whole bunch because there's a little part on the form that actually says if your address has changed and you now live and vote in Stockbridge, please indicate that on the form and return it anyway. So at least we'll know that we can flag it come fall if, again, the residential exemption starts taking form, and we can at least eliminate that one, add it back onto the list. I will say there are so many fluctuations in ownerships that is so, I mean, we've talked about this before and it's not part of this particular thing, but I have found quite a few actual PO boxes that are listed, but they're not on the voters list. So, I mean, if that's the simple indication that we shouldn't be picking them up for a second home, this might answer some of those questions, because there will be phone calls that come through that said, I'm not a second homeowner. Why are you sending me this form? And then at that point, the conversation will be, well, where do you pay your taxes? Where do you vote? Because I'm sending some of these forms to PO boxes because I'm not convinced or 100% sure that they don't have a house somewhere else. And again, I'm kind of doing a segue into something else, but that's the dilemma that we have with having so many different kinds of LLC ownerships, trust ownerships. We don't know if that particular person is the one that the bill should be going to, and if indeed they are a second homeowner. There's a lot of those. And that's something that, again, getting closer to the classification hearing, when we have to do a list of whether or not it even goes through, we still have to produce a list of how many potential residents, true residents of Stockbridge would be eligible for a residential exemption. And I mean, that, again, it's not an easy thing to do. I know there'd be a whole bunch of them that get missed. And again, that's something that has to be looked into, that if that is going to be part of the classification and it does get voted through for whatever reason, there's a lot of things that could happen after that, because you could once people start talking and realizing they didn't get the exemption, they may be coming into the office and questioning why they didn't. I took a course a few weeks ago, and the subject of ownership and domicile and the residential exemption came up. And I was talking to a community that actually has it, and they have 18,000, it's Barnstable County. They have 18,000 people that actually qualify for a residential exemption. And what they actually do is they have a vetting process that begins a year before the bills go out. They actually send an application to every single owner, both second homeowner and local, where they have to prove to the assessors that they do indeed live in that community. And they require their 1040 taxes, at least the first page, where they say they're paying their taxes. And if they don't have it returned to them by the time the classification comes around, they don't qualify for the exemption, even if you've lived in town for years. I mean, that's they have actually had to hire 4 people just to work on the residential exemption. It's a very difficult thing to do. I know we don't have 18,000, but we have 700 second homeowners that could possibly, some of them look and say, why didn't I get it? And then if you guys decided to give it to them and they prove that money then comes out of the overlay. So there's so many things that we need to talk about later on after we can get the certification done, because the vetting process is not an easy thing. I don't think so.
So Michael, so speaking of that, I did receive communication from a taxpayer who lives over in the Interlakens area, who recently got a personal property bill for their very first time.
Yep.
And there was, so if you're not aware, West Stockbridge a number of years ago offered rural delivery to a bunch of people in West Stockbridge. And somehow you must have changed the list.
Oh yeah, every year we go through and change the list.
So I think you picked up a lot of permanent residents that are not secondary homeowners.
Well, see that
in the Interlaken section.
That's it, right? But I mean, shouldn't they be on the voters list here?
Yeah, and they are.
Some of them aren't though. That's
I'll-
right. That one might be, but a whole bunch of them aren't.
Approached me was, so I think we do need to have a better process by
Right.
which we add and remove.
But that in itself is the problem. There's no better process because I have a whole list of them that are exactly like that. They also have Lennox PO boxes and they're not registered. So what is the process for that? Unless you're sending out an application every year in which they have to prove their residency to the town. And that's, I'm fine with that. If we end up going, not us, but the select board with the residential exemption, that's going to have to be done. There's no way around it. I mean, most of the deeds that came through last year, I can't even tell you how many LLCs, and some of them have PO boxes, but part of that LLC, are they owners that live here? Or they just have a PO box here? How do we know? I turn to the voters list. And when I don't see them on the voters list, I pick them up.
So do we have to do it every year, or can we do it every 3 years, sort of like or every 5 years? Can we do every time the property changes, have the form completed and then do it every 3 years or something?
I think that's going to depend on what the select board do with the residential exemption. I think that's going to be a big issue. I know Patrick White is going through the listing that I gave him last December, but even that has changed because all the deeds that came in last year aren't even on there, though those get changed in January and February. So I think that if we see that that's where it's going, and I think we'll know by the end of, the summer, then what we should do is the problem is it's too late at that point, because if a residential exemption is voted in at the classification, it's not a year after, it's immediately. It goes into effect for that tax billing. You can't go into a classification hearing without knowing how many, or at least thinking how many are eligible for that exemption. So as I'm doing the changes on the deeds, I'm keeping in mind and making a list of the ones that I feel are questionable, because the process of just going to the voters list isn't foolproof, because I will do that. I'll look and say, oh, look, they have a PO box. Typically, I would never pick them up, but I've gone to the voters list, which is brand new. She just gave us the new one, about a month ago? And I don't see them on there. So I just put a little question mark, not on voters list, but I've picked them up on personal property, hoping that if they get a bill, they will actually come in and tell us. But if the select board votes in a residential exemption and they all know that the vetting process is the most important thing, you're also going to have to concentrate on the overlay account, because you may have to up that as well, because you'll have people that come in later on that can prove that we may not have, that we put them as a second homeowner, but now that they can prove as of January 1st, still has to stick to that assessment date, that they actually lived and voted in Stockbridge. So we have to come up with something that's not just on that list.
They don't have to vote in Stockbridge. They just have to be a resident.
Right.
So.
Right, yes, they need to be on that list.
They have to live in Stockbridge. They don't
Yes.
necessarily have to vote, but that's the only tool that you have available.
Right, that is it. And I think that's all that.
What if we just took Lennox address, if this is the issue, why don't we just do Lennox addresses and West Stockbridge addresses and just ask them? This can't be a huge amount of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would solve the residents that are getting the personal property taxes in error.
Yeah.
But it's not going to solve the people that happen to have a PO box that
Right.
are, that are not residents.
No, but I think that at least
It helps the
it
residents.
lessens it.
Yes.
And I know what we're seeing also is a lot of address changes where people had opened up PO boxes here during COVID and now they're changing it back. So, and they're asking us to, I've actually gotten a request, can you keep it both ways? No, we cannot keep it both ways. These are for tax bills purposes, but people have to understand that it's not just the tax bill. There are butters lists. There are people that run labels off of our system. It's very important that address, it's not just for your tax bill. If you want to get notified what your neighbors are doing for a special permit or anything else, all that comes from our database. So there's a lot involved in it.
So also the formal list that we're getting ready to send out, almost, I think we realize that the personal property only goes to secondary homeowners, but there might be some full-time residents that still don't understand because they don't listen to the assessors meetings and
Right.
don't participate. So
I'm
I
hoping
think,
this weeds out a whole bunch of,
so I hope, yeah, so theoretically, this notice, as long as it's perfectly clear that this notice should be only going to secondary homeowners, that's sort of the same thing as mailing to West Stockbridge people and PO Box and Lennox people.
Right. Oh, I'm sure there's gonna be some that say, I'm not a second homeowner. At least we'll be able to at that
And that's
point,
okay.
talk to them and say, okay, this is part of the process. But it's never been I don't know if you remember the last time we did this, there was one taxpayer who got a notice and said to us, I've never been a second homeowner. I said, well, you've paid the bill every year. You remember that
Right.
whole issue?
So that's-
This can bring that up and we can keep a separate list and say, oh, okay, thank you for telling us, we'll make a note of it. And, but the only tool that I have now is looking at that list that she gives me, and even the deeds over the years have gotten worse and worse at even giving us where they bought the property.
So was there anywhere in Vision or on the property card we can notate that they are secondary or primary? So
We do that on the personal property side because that's the only way that I can run a list of labels that aren't everything, because we have utility values, we have business values, we have livestock values. I put a little note in the user defined field that says second home, so I can tell the system, give me a list of everything that's a second home. That's how we run labels for the report. We can do that. But what's going to happen though, another thing I learned at this course that I took, if the residential exemption goes through, my issue was, how do you tell the billing system that this person is eligible for it? Because there is no macro or equation that can go through and do what we're doing, talking about, well, what if they're in Lennox? They should be. So I was told that, and this was by the new assessor in Barnstable, that they don't have soft rate like we do, but he seems to think that we would have to plug it in on the assessor side. Who gets it? So it's almost a reverse of the second homeowner. You're now telling the system, this person's eligible for the residential exemption. Then when it gets to the tax billing, they're looking for that field that has, which is in Vision, it's not on the personal property side, it would be on the real estate side. Let's say that the amount coming off of every eligible parcel is 100,000. That 100,000, in my mind, I thought it was being done on the billing side, that someone was literally sitting in front of the monitor and telling the system, okay, here's 600 people that are getting this 100,000 off of their bill. Because our big concern as assessors is when you run the commitment, does the tax commitment match what you're telling the DOR you're going to be taking in for tax revenue? If they don't, you can't send a bill out. And we've never done anything like this before. So the vetting process, the first year is probably going to be a little difficult, but then you'd have to make the decision early on the next calendar year that you're going to be sending out some type of form or there's this or something in place, or else it's going to be chaos like we've never seen before. Because the moment that, let's say this were to happen and there's a second homeowner that might be talking to a resident and they're like, well, what is this? You know, and how come I'm not eligible for it? That we need to have a process in place with maybe an application and what we're looking for to qualify your domicile for something like this. I don't want to wait till last minute to do this because again, if it's something, and I'm just speculating because I don't know where it's going to stand, but if it's something that gets voted through for fiscal year 23, I think there are some towns that think you can wait a year. You can't wait a year. The state will require you to do a residential exemption before your bills go out for that. So, I mean, not only are we in certification that could possibly hold up values, now we've got this that could hold up the tax rate. It could be the perfect storm for not getting a tax bill out by the end of the year if this happens. But the vetting on it is for me, it's going to take up a lot of time. I mean, it's going to be something but I think we should do it. I mean, I think it should be something that's in place.
We think we should.
This is a huge.
You should be doing the vetting, not necessarily, you're not.
Right.
Politicking on the exemption. You're just saying.
Oh, no. That's not for us. You know, I mean, this is strictly because as the Board of Assessors, you're the only ones that can grant that. And as far as who's eligible and who isn't eligible. It doesn't get voted in by the board, it gets voted in by the select board, but we're the ones that have to carry it through and get it on the commitment sheets, print it on the tax bills and go forward with that. And again, I think I missed the roundtable meeting that we had in Lenox where this was going to be. I was sick that day. I really wanted to be there, but it was a big discussion on, you know, let's say you get it and how do you vet it and how do you get to the very end? Because there isn't a single community out in Western Mass that has that at the moment. But seeing what other communities are doing out on the Cape, most of them were in the class that I took. And, you know, it was very interesting to see what is 18,000 that you have to vet. I mean, that is a huge, and I can imagine they must have a lot of similar ownerships like we have, you know, I mean, it being very touristy and a second homeowner community, they probably have an address listed, but they live somewhere else and they go out to their Cape house. I mean, I'd imagine it would be
How
similar.
did it work out there? You said, does every town in the county?
No, there's 26 communities that have it all out east. And
Barnstable County, not.
well, I didn't realize that Barnstable is actually made up of, I think he said 8 different districts. But there's one assessor's office that controls all of them. And I believe.
Assessor's office handles all the towns.
Yeah, and handles the residential.
County government.
Yep, he had his assistant there who handles the application process. They had 18,000 that went out for 1 year. They're also quarterly billing. So, I mean, they have a little bit more time to work on these things.
So just throwing it out there. So if the home is owned by a trust or owned by an LLC, are they eligible for the residential exemption? So because the next question would be, okay, we have a husband and wife. Husband says that he's a resident in Stockbridge or out in the Cape to get the residential exemption. And then they all has a home in Florida and the wife says, I'm a resident in Florida. So they're sort of double dipping on the exemption.
And we're seeing that a lot now. We're getting, well, not here, but Florida, it seems like Sarasota, they are constantly asking us, does such and such own a property up your way? And are they getting an exemption? And you know how few we give. So, I mean, as far as the elderly exemptions and the veterans, I basically know them in my head. And as soon as they send it, I'm like, nope, they don't. But we have to do a formal letter that I have to sign so they can get whatever they're getting in Florida. Exactly. So that they're doing their vetting process as well.
So again, if it's owned by any type of trust or LLC, the residential exemption would not apply because it's not owned by an individual.
Right. I believe I will double check, but I have a feeling your name has to appear on that. it's like when you get the statutory exemption, if you have it under a trust, you can't get that exemption. We have to tell the homeowner, it's an awful thing to say, you're not eligible for it, especially if it's an elderly person, because you may have transferred that ownership to your kids. And is it worth it to switch it back? Most of the time they don't. But yeah, so it's, and there are, like I said, I'll see a deed and it's so almost a relief when I see, husband and wife or, partners or whatever. And I realize, okay, these are the actual owners of the property that we're sending it to. But the moment that you see, 3 or 4 different names listed, maybe one of those trustees lives there, but how do I know? So,
But even if,
yeah, it is.
But even if the trustee lives there, they're
Doesn't mean they're the owner.
They're not the owner.
That's right. And I would say that if this were to happen, I would think maybe the first 2 years would be really confusing and then we could get into some type of groove. But again, is there ever going to be a time where, because the sales haven't changed since I've been here, there've always been, if we pick up 20 second homeowners, we may be taking 10 off. But within that 20, I'm not 100% sure that they're second homeowners, so and that can trickle into or move over to the vetting process for the residential exemption too. Stockbridge is so unique, but I can imagine a lot of communities have, well, if they're similar, like Lenox that has as many second homeowners as we have, there's got to be a similar situation. There's got to be something that we could figure out, but I don't think it's ever going to be 100% there.
No, but I think what we should do is once you get past reval next year, even if the exemption doesn't come through, we should maybe try to figure out a better way of figuring out if somebody's a primary.
I've always
and then not do it every year.
Been worried about, is this the easiest way? Well, just because they, are listing it as something other than our zip code, are they truly a second homeowner? But at this point now, when I'm going through the computer and I see the deed and I'm literally typing in the new ownership, I've got the street listing right next to me. But is that foolproof? It's just like Gary said, maybe single out the Lenox ones and the West Stockbridge ones, but I still think it's going to be.
But then you're theoretically protecting the people that are residents that are being picked up in error. But on the other side, we're not picking up the people that have PO boxes and
Exactly.
that should be secondary.
Exactly. Those are my biggest issues with the, I'll put a question mark next to it because when we were going through COVID and we were getting, more address changes than we've ever gotten. And I'll see, okay, these people are no longer second homeowners. Here's their new PO box. But what I'll do, and what I had done is I'll look up that previous location where we were sending it to and see if that house is on the market or if they had sold it. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that, that's the best way to do it. And again, now I'm seeing a lot of those notes that I made. Can you please change the PO box to the previous address? So they never got rid of, they never sold their first home or what they consider maybe their second home. They just moved up here as for protection or whatever reason. That's happening a lot. Doesn't mean they're selling their property, but they're changing their PO boxes. And so again, it's almost a little bit mind-boggling trying to keep track of all of those. And I have to stress to the second homeowners as well that we try our best to send that bill to where it's supposed to go. But there's just sometimes we cannot have multiple addresses. Our system has one area in which technically it's supposed to be where were you as of January 1st. That is our assessment date. That is our ownership date. And that's going to come into play too with the residential exemption as well, because the bills don't come out until the fall. If that were to get voted on in the fall, we have to go back and say, where were you as of January 1st of that year? Not where are you right now? So that'll be another, we're tied to that January 1st. It's a frozen moment in time. We have to stick to it. But I do think this is a good discussion to keep going because.
Notwithstanding all the uncertainties we've been discussing, you started off saying roughly 709. And what's the rough number for residents? Do you have that?
Well, when we were doing Tammy and I went through and we were trying to vet the list for the classification. I think I was using 600 for the locals.
600 for the,
So theoretically, add those two together and that would be the total number of parcels.
Yeah, well, again, you have to eliminate the 2 families, the 3 families, the 4 families.
Commercial.
Yeah, condos are commercial, industrial.
So is that number?
So I don't have the exact number, but
So you were approximately 1,300.
Yep.
So say 1,400 of
yes.
residential, single family residential units.
Yep.
Or, yeah.
And again, going into the classification, we won't be able to just give, and let's just put it this way, if we feel like that's going to pass, and again, there should be a lot of discussion about that going forward, but we've had these discussions before, and I think people know how we stand on that, but going into the classification this year, whenever that may be, you can't just have an estimate. I mean, we have to nail down a number, because what happens is the classification hearing happens and let's say it gets voted through. The very next day when we submit for our tax rate, the calculation for how much comes off of each eligible parcel is what creates your tax rate. So you can't just be flimsy about it going into the classification, not having a number that you're going to use for submission the very next day. Typically when we go in, because there really was never that much discussion about it, I would just quickly go through and say, okay, I think there's around 600 parcels. This time around, what Tammy and I did in the last fall was we went through the entire list because we weren't sure where things were going to stand. And we literally went through every single one, and she had the voters list with her. And we tried to vet the list at that time going into the classification. It didn't get voted through, not to say that it wouldn't going forward, but just in case it does, we have to be prepared with a concrete number going into that. And again, it's not gonna be exact. That's why, and Mike and I have discussed this, the overlay will have to go up in order to accommodate, let's say I like using the 100,000, but if you were to use 100,000 off of each eligible parcel, that's gonna be multiplied by whatever the new tax rate is at that point. And that amount would be the amount coming off of each one. We'd have to figure in this kind of world, how many people could we have possibly missed? Multiply that by the difference and add that to the overlay, because that could be, and again, I always stress adding to the overlay increases your tax rate. So there's a way of saying, let's do this as a break for the taxpayers, but how much of a break is it when certain elements are going to keep increasing the tax rate in the end? But that's a conversation for another day.
But in theory, that overlay could come down after a few years when all of the issues
Right.
would iron out.
We'll never be 100%, because regardless of the pandemic and everything and how many PO boxes were open, even without that, we've always had a lot of address changes. I mean, it's just the type, and we're one of the communities that makes an effort of, before the bills go out, actually placing instead of just going by the rule, which the state rule is whoever owned the property as of January 1st, they're responsible for the bill. But we know darn well that when a sale takes place, the lawyers will divvy up the first half and the second half bill. We're not privy to that, nor do we want to be, but they will call us and say, I didn't own this. Why'd you send it to me? So in trying to keep our collection rate as high as it is, we send it to the new owner in hopes that they know the agreement, which was made at the closing, and the bill doesn't get tossed. But, they have every right to send the bill back, but we have every right to, as the tax collector would, to collect it in whatever means they have to. So we try to avoid that. And this past billing, the second half billing, we had 300 labels that were put on properties. It wasn't just ownership changes, but that's how many address changes we get just from November until the second half billing. It's insane. There's a lot. So yeah, huge task with doing this. Do I think we need a separate person to do it? Probably not, but it's definitely something that we need to, especially if the residential exemption is in play, look into a lot closer. But this second home, going back to the second homeowner study, we'll probably weed out a whole bunch of them. You know, we'll make a little spreadsheet of the ones that we get notifications on that tell us differently from where we sent it. But it's definitely something to keep talking about and figuring out what is the best process for vetting a town like Stockbridge that has, you know, very diverse types of ownership.
So speaking of the diverse ownerships, say Pine Woods, they're presumably all residents. They really have to be. Are they part of the 600 number or not? Or as
Individually, they get billed one bill. So
Pine Woods gets one bill.
they do.
So that's,
Yep. I don't know. I'd have to, again, that's another one of the ones that we'd have to look into. I mean, typically it goes to the ownership, and if it's the second homeowners or the vetting process is not for renters. So they probably should be eliminated.
So personal property is, so just to say it again, so personal property is not assessed to renters in apartments.
No, and the residential exemption doesn't apply to renters either. They would not get it. It's only single family ownership.
Right, so everybody that lives, say, at Heaton Court or at Pine Woods do not pay personal property.
that's right. That's
Yep.
what I'm,
Yep, because again, it's one bill that goes to the owner, but what would happen in the vetting process is too, we would have to run everything by use code. So the single families and the condos, which are basically single family, they're the only ones that are eligible for that particular exemption.
But with that being said, so like the owners of Pine Woods or Heaton Court, they get a personal property bill for their snow blowers and.
Yeah, as a if they're a corporation, or a business, they would,
I
yeah.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
For stuff that's used to service the property.
And they're on a different form of list that's what you just signed the application. They're going to be looking at all of that, hopefully be giving us a list that's, you know, a lot more grand than what we have.
Businesses, including corporations and.
There's about 100 businesses
100?
yeah, the contract is for 100 parcels.
Right.
But if they, you know, the whole point of doing this is that they will find businesses that we weren't aware of, and they'll find them and they'll list what they have in that business.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. So that's a win-win because we've never had that done. It's part of the certification, but also they're known for coming into communities and finding the businesses that, you know, again, we would love to see the form of list come in on a regular basis, filled out from the businesses. They don't always do it.
So when a business opens up, do they have to go see Terry to get a DBA? Mm-hmm. And so.
Yeah, and Teresa gives me the listing of
So that's how
new ones.
And that's how we pick them up.
Yep. Or I'll just drive around and see. But again, I could be, if they're home businesses and things like contractors, I mean, they're supposed to pay a personal property bill.
Right, but as long as they're being forced to go to the town hall and get a DBA, that.
It does, it triggers
Triggers
it.
it.
And again, it's where they open as of January 1st. So if they opened up in January, but not January 1st, we can't pick them up until the following year. Yep, this is gonna be interesting to see how many they find, and how much more listings that they can, you know, how many more items they can pick up for the personal property.
Where are we at now, Mike?
We are at I know, we went off board, but I just thought that was important because we spent so much time on that. The maps are back from CII and the AccessJS is updated. So that's good. I haven't actually made the changes yet on our system, but if you, anything that was sent in for calendar year 21 is actually changed on there. There's a few that got updated. Joe Barbieri was here, is it Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday, our first meeting with the DOR for the certification. I had to give him close to 100 record cards, which is a lot compared to what typically when the state comes up to start their data quality study, it's a random sample. They usually say pick 25 to 30 a few condos, a few single families, a couple rentals, some commercial. They're doing it a little bit different this year where because the market is so, he used the word crazy, but last year's sales were the most we've ever had and the highest we've ever had. So they're concerned that they're looking at the sales as well as we're looking at the sales before the sales analysis takes place. So it was, give me 40 sales within a 2-year period, and within those 40 sales, give me a few non-sales that are around those sales so they can check the consistency of the neighborhoods. And then it was the top 5 taxpayers, mixed use, some chapter lands, all of the industrial, 10 of the commercial, a few rentals. Altogether, I think maybe he had 60 or 70 record cards. And this week he's supposed to be up here doing his review of those. So we'll get a study back from him with anything that they found or what he found during his field review of the cards that I gave him. And that's usually the first step. We went over the work plan for the certification, and that looks good. We went over the recommendations that the state gave us on our last reval for fiscal 18, which was basically the same thing that they write down: maintain your land schedule, maintain your or residential land schedule, your commercial land schedule, continue your cyclicals. And at that point, we didn't have the updated vision software. So they wrote, I don't know if they didn't write us up, but they put a little blurb, please check that for next time around. Everything's been updated, so we're good on that front too. So I think it went really well. He wants me to send all the LA3, which is all the sales data, to him so he can start looking at the fluctuations and what we have assessed now and what people paid for their property last year. We will not have to go back 2 years because we had 86 single family, that includes condo, sales last year, which is almost 40 more sales than we typically have. So, I mean, that may not seem like a lot to some cities, but that's big.
That's double.
It's huge. And the most I've ever seen and have to work with
Yeah.
in Stockbridge ever since I've been here.
And we've been sitting in meetings sometimes when, they say that we don't have enough sales to help justify. And so you have to go back to previous years or.
Yeah, I mean, the worry is that the fluctuation between the difference between the two is there, but it's our jobs to get to market value. And that's why the state, because they're seeing it. I mean, Joe has 12 communities that are up for certification this year. And he's like, you're not the only ones that are in that situation. It's everywhere. And I think that's why they're focusing on looking at the sales now instead of waiting until, because typically all they see at the end is a ratio. That's it. But I'm going to have issues justifying, the changes and what we have to do. So I have to make sure that the state sees all of this up front so they know. I would say it's going to be a little bit difficult to make those. It's not difficult making those adjustments and getting there. It's making sure that everyone understands why we're doing it and why we have to do it. That's our jobs to do it.
So it should be said, so if in theory the assessments doubled, in theory the tax rate should be half in rough.
Yes, as long as the equation is always there, as long as the budget
Right. So the budget
is not.
So if the
crazy.
In theory, if the spending doesn't change and everything doubled, in theory, the rate should be half.
Oh, it should drop. It should plummet.
Right. So just so people shouldn't be concerned that just because an assessment goes up doesn't mean their tax bill is going up. It's part of a bigger picture where if the spending goes up, then your.
Right, because we're always, you can only get 2.5% of your tax levy from the previous year plus new growth, which is typically around 50,000. That's probably not going to change that much, might go up a little bit. So as long as if you're saying you need this much for your tax levy and your valuations have gone up, then the part of it that makes it there is the tax rate. You won't need that much as long as everything in between with the budget is consistent. And I do know that by going over the receipts early, and Mike can attest to this and probably elaborate a lot more, is, as it stands right now, we were definitely right there on our number for what we, thought we were going to bring in, probably a lot more. So that right there shows that we probably could definitely focus more on that. But again, the equation is, I can't tell people what the values are going to be right at this moment. So to be able to come up with exactly what that tax rate is right now, I would love to be able to do that. We can come up with an estimate, but the valuations are always going to be that final what if. And, we won't know that until August, September, of where we actually had to make some tough calls. The sales speak for themselves. At this point, and I'm not seeing much of, maybe Doug can attest this. I'm not seeing as many sales so far this year, but the prices are still high.
I mean, I think the lack of inventory is a problem in the real estate world, but the prices are still up
Yep.
there.
And again, whatever happens this year will be what happens to your valuation next year.
Right.
So we're just focusing on getting through the certification, and a certification is no different than what we did last year, other than the fact that it's up to the Department of Revenue and the Bureau of Local Assessment to make sure that we're upholding the certification standards that they put forward. And what we do in Stockbridge is no different than what a big city is doing, it's just on a smaller scale. Everything that we're required to do, they're required to do. And it certainly doesn't make it any easier when there are some unknowns. This, for me, will be the first time that I've ever seen sales that high where we have to make, these adjustments. And I don't think that's a mystery to, the average taxpayer at this point, where things headed or went for the sales last year.
So Michael, we try to be 100% of assessed value.
We do.
So what's the range? Is it 95 to 105?
No, it's 90 to 110.
90 to 110. Do we know what other communities such as West Stockbridge and Great Barrington do?
I don't. I can find out though.
Well, because
I know Great Barrington is typically at 100%. West Stockbridge has a company, RRG, do their assessments. So I don't know if I think the assessor is more administrative. I don't think they handle the values there. But I know Ross in Great Barrington, him and I talk all the time. He's from North Adams. So I know that they're typically at 100% of value.
Because the only reason why I ask is it affects the way our assessment is for the Berkshire Hills School District.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is if we were at 100%, 110%, and Great Barrington was at 90 and West Stockbridge is at 90,
Yep.
could affect our assessment. So
Right. I know the only time that we had ever talked about going like above, I mean, at this point, I think it would be absolutely be crazy to go above 100%, right? I mean, but when there was that housing crisis, at one point there were communities that were going above that percentage, and we never have. You can, you have every right to. It's, at this point, it'd be more about, should we be at 90% of, market value?
Well, Great
We've always
Barrington-
strived to be around 98, 99%.
Great Barrington's concerned because our valuations are higher than theirs and our tax rate is, exceedingly lower.
Yep.
right. Well, that's why I just want to make sure we're all comparing apples to apples. And the only other thing I was concerned about with the whole school thing is if we include our nonprofits in that. Because we have a lot of nonprofits that do not pay taxes.
Millions.
And I think we have a lot more than Barrington.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
And so I was really surprised. So I was wondering if the school board takes that because it really should be based on the assessment of taxpayers.
And is it something that
Yeah.
usually gets addressed at the town meeting, or I don't know if it will be.
No,
I'm not
think so.
privy to that. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that Great Barrington is 100% and theoretically,
Yeah.
hopefully West Stockbridge.
I could talk to him again, but I know him, and typically I don't ever remember a conversation where they were, I think we're going to go, change that. Again, there are some communities that consistently will stay at a, 90% level. There's a lot of politics that gets involved and stuff like that, and it shouldn't be. Here it's what is your market? What's your market telling you? I always thought, because of other states, where you go to other states, they can do whatever they want to do. They're not protected by Prop 2.5. So if there's a shortage in their, budget, well, we're just going to raise the real estate tax. You can't do that in Massachusetts. That is one, I stress that to the taxpayers. Because there are phone calls that come through where, oh, you guys must be hurting for cash. That's not how it works. I mean, not when it comes to valuation. Valuation is a specific set of rulings from the certification standards that we have to uphold. But the assessors probably maybe, and if they're in talks with the finance committee and the selectmen when it comes to, where do you want your bottom line to be for your tax rate? You can absolutely go between 90 and 110%. I mean, that's not.
Well, I think Great Barrington's concerned because we as a town voted to pay a higher portion
For
a
capital.
few years ago for
Right.
capital expenditures. But then in their whole formula, there's this other piece about, the valuations and the tax rate. And when you get all done with it, I think Great Barrington still comes out on the short end of the, at least just doing the math, I think that they're going to still end up, or at least they feel, I should say, that they're going to pay a higher percentage.
Yeah.
But, that's a whole nother
Yeah, I mean,
discussion.
and going back to the 90 versus 110%, I can see maybe adjusting that, especially when we're in an up market and that when we get to the top and let's say there's an extreme drop off.
Right.
The way we do our assessments and the way we look back at previous sales.
Yep.
We could be having a drop off in the real estate market where our assessments are still going up because the data we're using is so old.
Yeah, and you also have to remember and kind of gauge it with on how many abatement requests you get too. I mean, that might come back and, I always, as you know, always fear the worst. Like when we change the valuations, we're going to have just, inundated with abatement applications. You never know where the taxpayer's psyche is, it's like, are they looking at the tax amount or is it just the end result of what, the economy is telling you, or are they looking at the valuation? I would hope, because for us, the tax amount really isn't the issue, it's the valuation. We're not adjusting your tax amount, we're adjusting your value if there's a reason to adjust it. Everything else that comes into play after our values with the finances, and, the budget, that's nothing to do with us. So we're always, I always try to get it out there as much as I can that we're all about the valuations, of the community. The end result is going to be the tax rate and where that sits. But we're in good position financially, I would.
But just to say it too, so we're doing evaluations as of 1/1/2022.
Yes.
And we're using the sales of all of 21.
Yes.
Correct. So if something was sold in January of 2022, that does not come into play
At all.
next year. So we're really looking at sales that occurred, if we're setting the rate, if we're selling the valuations now, we're looking stuff that might be 18 months old.
Absolutely. And actually, when we didn't have enough sales, we were using 2 years worth of sales. And what would happen the very next year is we would end up using the sales again for two tax periods. I never liked that idea, but the craziness that happened with the world has caused us to really have more than we typically need. It's usually 2% of your valuation base, or so you take your class for 101s and you need 2% of each class. And typically, I know over the years, a lot of years we didn't make it for the 101s. This time around, we will have no problem whatsoever. We'll have that 1 year. And we also have enough properties around the lake, because that's a whole different study that has to be done. Typically, I'm doing studies grabbing sales from other communities just to do a study because we didn't have enough sales here. So yeah, the upside of this is the sales analysis. There will be more in it, and you always want to have the most that you can in a sales analysis. I mean, to have the luxury of a big city and having all of those sales would be wonderful, but that's not typically how it's ever been. But this is a record number, and it's going to be really interesting to see where the shifts in the valuation goes. But like you said, it's always going to be the bottom line. Look what your tax bill is going to be at the end. and don't necessarily equate it with the valuation at this point going up.
Mike, I have to go, but is there anything else that we have to do or?
Well, we can, we were gonna go into executive session, but we're meeting next week. Are you guys okay with that? Because there's a appellate tax board case coming up, which, it's for Camp Mackinac. We were gonna discuss that, and there's a 3ABC form, for Berkshire Scenic Railway Museum that I put in here, but we can table that till next week. I actually have a little bit more work to do on the
Okay.
Camp Mackinac, if I was gonna suggest we wait on that anyway, if you guys are okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. I know, Tom, you told me not to put down, the update for the tax exemption. I forgot to take it off.
Right, so as I mentioned last time, we're once again in a pause mode because we can't really do the questionnaire.
Okay.
Summer while all the nonprofits are kind of reevaluating where they are. I'm going to report to the Board of Selectmen about this on Thursday. At their
Okay.
meeting.
And do we have anyone zoomed in? No. So no questions or comments from our audience. I just wanted to quickly mention, I don't know if I mentioned to you, Doug, we did get an email back from from Tim Fountain for CAI about our sketches. Did I tell you about that?
No.
Yeah, so it's a $1,500 one-time charge to do they either change it to a JPEG or they change it to a PDF of our, he was excited. He's like, good news, Mike, $1,500 for the program to do it. And I said, that's great. We want to do it. We actually are going to budget it as part of the money coming out of the overlay. And I said, just keep us in mind I thought maybe after the certification is done, not, because I don't know what work I have to do on that, but I thought as soon as certification is done, that'll be the thing that we can do. So that was great news.
Yeah.
And even if we have to pay that every year, that's not much.
Well, it's a great tool. So basically, taxpayers can review their dimensions of their home.
Yes.
The appraisers.
Finally.
It's going to be,
Yep.
It's great information for it.
And I also have a 2-day conference. It's typically the in-person conference for Vision, the user group meeting. It's Wednesday and Thursday. I signed up for it. So whatever updates I find out on the new software, because there is a new update coming, I'll tell you about on the meeting. You guys okay for Monday?
Yeah.
Monday, the 2nd.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And Steve wants you to be the host, right? I thought we mentioned. We'll figure that out. Okay. All right.
And then we're not going into executive session.
No, we'll hold off until Monday.
All right.
Okay.
I make a motion, we close the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.